Hello, Muslim friends of the world. That night, Los Angeles was shrouded in unbearable tension. The streets leading to a small, humble mosque in the heart of the city were suddenly filled with armored vehicles, blaring sirens, and the swift movements of hundreds of FBI agents. Nur al-Hidayah Mosque, previously known as a simple place of worship, had become the center of national attention. Rumors swirled that a major threat was hiding inside. Leading the operation was Commander David Carter, a veteran with more than 20 years of experience. His face betrayed his tension, but deep down, his heart harbored doubt. Wasn't this just a place of worship? Yet the intelligence reports he received were adamant. Something big was happening inside. Inside the mosque, Imam Yusuf stood in front of his congregation. The middle-aged man, with a calm and peaceful gaze, showed no sign of panic. He knew their mosque was surrounded, but he calmly urged his congregation to remain composed and pray. Allah is with us. We have nothing but the truth. If they wish to speak, we will listen. If they wish to attack, we will surrender to him, he said firmly. The tension reached its peak when Carter delivered an ultimatum through a loudspeaker. Everyone inside the mosque, come out with your hands above your head. If you don't, we will come in. But before the ultimatum could finish, something entirely unexpected occurred. A massive fire suddenly broke out in the buildings surrounding the mosque. The flames spread rapidly, engulfing nearby high-rises. The night sky turned into a sea of red, and the air was filled with thick smoke and the panicked screams of people running for their lives. The FBI agents were forced to shift their attention to rescuing civilians trapped in the area. Carter, standing near the mosque, was stunned by the uncontrollable chaos. What was even more shocking was that, despite the raging inferno, the mosque remained untouched. The smoke and embers seemed to stop at the edge of the mosque's grounds. Even the grass surrounding the mosque stayed lush and green, untouched by the heat. Some of the agents who witnessed this started murmuring in disbelief. What is this? How is the mosque still standing? Inside the mosque, the congregation, who had been anxious, now sat in awe. Imam Yusuf stood at the center, leading a prayer that echoed through every corner of the building. O Allah, you are our only protector. To you alone, we surrender. Their prayers carried a serene tone, in stark contrast to the chaos outside. Carter, still rooted to his spot, felt something stir within him. This was beyond logic. A man who had never believed in anything spiritual was now questioning everything. What did I just witness? And why do I feel like something is drawing me toward this mosque? That night, the siege turned into the beginning of something far greater. An event that would not only change the fate of the mosque, but also the hearts of those who came to attack it. As the massive fire surrounding the mosque was finally brought under control, the fire department worked tirelessly to extinguish the remaining flames, while FBI agents and other officials evacuated civilians trapped in the area. The mosque, however, remained standing, untouched by the inferno. That miracle left a lingering silence, one filled with confusion. Commander David Carter stood before the mosque's gates, speechless. This was beyond reason. The mosque appeared to have been shielded by an invisible force. Several of his agents, now visibly unsettled, whispered amongst themselves, questioning what they had just witnessed. One of the younger agents, Lisa Monroe, approached Carter and said, "Sir, I think we need to talk to them. There's something not right here." Carter nodded after a long pause. With a quick order, he decided to enter the mosque alongside a few other agents. They left their weapons behind. This was no longer an assault operation. Their steps felt heavy as they walked through the mosque's grounds, which were still green and serene amid the destruction around them. Inside, the atmosphere was completely different. The air was cool, and the stillness was almost tangible. The worshippers, who had been tense moments before, now sat in a circle, calmly reading the Quran. Imam Yusuf welcomed Carter and his team with a warm smile. "Welcome," he said softly. Carter looked directly into Imam Yusuf's eyes, searching for answers. "We didn't come here to attack again, but I need to know, what's going on here?" he asked seriously, though the threat had left his voice. Imam Yusuf smiled faintly. "We don't have any definite answers. All we know is that Allah always protects his house. We are just his humble servants. Perhaps this is his way of showing something to us all. The conversation stretched on for hours. Imam Yusuf kalmno objasnio učenja Islama, mir, pravda I važnost održavanja odnosa s Bogom. He answered all of Carter's and his agents' questions, including the accusations they had heard about the mosque. Lisa Monroe, who had been silently listening, began to feel something stir in her heart. She watched as the worshippers in the mosque remained calm despite the siege. They even offered food and drink to the FBI agents who had entered. "Why are you all so calm? We came with weapons. We suspected you of something. But you welcomed us," Lisa asked in astonishment. Imam Yusuf smiled. "Islam teaches us to respond to harm with kindness. When you enter here, you are no longer our enemy. You are our guest." One of the older agents, John Harris, had been quietly contemplating for a long time before finally speaking. "This is insane. I've been on many operations, but I've never felt anything like this before. Why do I feel at peace?" As the night wore on, Carter began to sense something shifting inside him. He could no longer deny that this mosque was unlike any other place he had ever been. There was something greater than himself, greater than the mission he had been given. Before he left, he looked at Imam Yusuf and said, "I don't know what exactly happened here, but I have a feeling this won't be the last time we meet." Imam Yusuf simply replied with a knowing smile, "Guidance comes from God, Commander Carter. Whoever seeks the truth, God will show it to them." As the agents exited the mosque that night, they didn't just leave the building. They carried with them the unsettling questions that had shaken their beliefs. Weeks passed after the events at Nur al-Hidayah Mosque, and a transformation was slowly taking root, not just within the mosque, but also in the FBI office. The mosque had become a symbol of something far beyond what any agent had expected. The miracle of the fire had spread far and wide, drawing curiosity and wonder from all who heard about it. Yet for some of the agents involved in the siege, it was not just about the building. It was about something far more personal, an awakening that they couldn't ignore. David Carter sat at his desk in the FBI headquarters, the stacks of paperwork in front of him almost invisible. His mind, however, was elsewhere. The quiet in the office felt heavy. His thoughts were consumed with the memory of that night. What happened? He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed deep within him. Why am I still thinking about the mosque? Lisa Monroe, the young agent who had accompanied him that night, was also struggling with the same questions. Late into the evening, she found herself at the local library, her hands trembling as she leafed through a Quran she had borrowed. The pages seemed to call to her, drawing her in with their tranquility. She had always considered herself open-minded, but she had never expected her curiosity to lead her here. As she read, she was struck by a verse that resonated deeply with her. "Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest." Her eyes filled with tears as the weight of the words sank in. Could this be what I've been missing, she thought. The chaos of her daily life, the pressure, the doubts, everything had suddenly seemed so insignificant compared to the peace she now craved. John Harris, a hardened agent who had long been skeptical of religion, found himself in a similar state of unrest. Despite his tough exterior, he had never felt more unsettled. He had joined the FBI to fight crime, to uphold the law. But what was law, he wondered, without something greater to guide it? He had heard about Lisa's discovery, and without understanding why, he found himself at the mosque one evening, standing on the edge of the prayer hall, watching in awe as the worshippers prayed in unison. As the days passed, Carter couldn't fight the pull any longer. He made a decision. He had to return to the mosque. This time it was not as an investigator, but as a seeker of truth. Alone, without the weight of his position or his badge, Carter returned to Nur al-Hidayah. When he entered, the stillness of the mosque seemed to welcome him, and once again, Imam Yusuf greeted him with a warm smile. "Commander, I've been expecting you," Imam Yusuf said gently. "I don't know what I'm looking for," Carter admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I can't shake the feeling that I need to be here." The Imam led him to a quiet corner, where they spoke for hours about faith, about the journey of the soul, and about the peace that comes when one surrenders to a higher purpose. Imam Yusuf did not force any answers onto Carter. He simply let the commander ask his questions and reflect on the answers that came from within. Carter, listening intently, felt his heart slowly open. There was a peace in the words, a tranquility that he had never encountered before. The chaos in his mind began to quiet, and for the first time in a long while, he felt as though he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The following week saw more FBI agents quietly making their way to the mosque. Some came to ask questions, others simply came to sit in silence, hoping to find what they had been searching for. Lisa, John, and many others began reading the Quran, learning the basics of Islam, and grappling with their newfound feelings. They didn't expect to find a final answer immediately, but each visit brought them a step closer to something profound. One evening, Carter returned to the mosque with Lisa and John. They sat in the back during a prayer service, overwhelmed by the tranquility that filled the room. When the prayer ended, Carter stood up and, without fully understanding why, found himself walking to the front. His hands shook as he spoke the words, Ashhadu alla ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. He had just declared the Shahada, his acceptance of Islam. Lisa followed suit a few weeks later, her heart brimming with a quiet certainty she had never known before. And then John. Slowly but surely, the agents began to shed their old identities and step into a new chapter of their lives. The quiet transformation wasn't just within the walls of the mosque. As news spread of what was happening in Los Angeles, others began to question their own beliefs. It was a ripple effect, one that started with the fire and the miracle of the mosque's survival, but it grew into something much larger. In the end, it wasn't the force of the FBI or any law that had brought these agents to Islam. It was something more powerful, the undeniable pull of a truth they had never expected to find in a place like this, in a moment like this. And as they sat together in the mosque, feeling the peace they had once sought through power and control, they realized that sometimes the greatest strength comes from surrender. Months passed, and the transformation among the FBI agents in Los Angeles became undeniable. The city had begun to change, not just in the physical sense, but in the hearts and minds of those who had once stood against the mosque. The miracle that had taken place there, the way the fire had spared the masjid, leaving it untouched, had slowly become a symbol of something far greater. It was not just a story about survival, but a testament to the power of faith and the ways in which the truth could reach even the hardest of hearts. The agents who had once stood ready to storm the mosque now returned, but not as invaders, now they were seekers. The transformation was gradual but powerful. David Carter, now a frequent presence at the mosque, had begun to change in ways he could hardly explain. The hardened commander, once steeped in skepticism and duty, now found peace in the simple act of prayer. He began to walk through life with a sense of calm he had never known. His journey had not been an easy one. He had questioned everything, his purpose, his identity, his place in the world. But each time he stepped foot in the mosque, he felt a little lighter, a little closer to the truth. One evening, as Carter stood by the masjid's prayer hall, watching the worshippers bow in prayer, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He remembered the first night, the chaos, the siege, and the questions that had plagued him. Was it all just coincidence, he wondered? But deep down, he knew better. It wasn't coincidence, it was destiny. Lisa Monroe had also undergone a dramatic change. She had always been someone who thrived on logic and reason, someone who had trusted only in what could be seen and measured. But after months of visiting the mosque, she found herself drawn to something more than reason. She had always thought peace was something you could only find in fleeting moments, but in the mosque, she found it in abundance. One evening, as she sat quietly beside Carter and John Harris, Lisa looked around at the faces of her colleagues, agents who had once been strangers, even adversaries, and saw something in their eyes that she had never noticed before. It was peace. It was acceptance. They had found something that no amount of training or tactical preparation could offer. They had found a connection to something bigger than themselves. Then one day, in front of the congregation, Carter made another decision. Standing before the group of worshippers, many of whom had been there when he first arrived, he declared, "I stand before you not as Commander Carter, but as a brother, someone who has found peace and truth in the most unexpected place. Islam has changed my life. It has brought me the tranquility I had been searching for my entire life. Today, I commit to this faith." The room fell silent for a moment before a wave of emotion swept through the congregation. One by one, the agents, Lisa, John, and others, followed Carter's example. They each stood up and declared their shahada, embracing the faith that had been slowly growing within them since that first fateful night. As the weeks went on, something even more extraordinary began to happen. The story of the FBI agents embracing Islam began to spread far beyond Los Angeles. The media, once critical of the mosque, now reported on the peaceful transformations that had taken place. People from across the nation traveled to the mosque, hoping to understand the power of what had occurred there. Imam Yusuf, who had remained humble throughout the growing attention, continued to teach with the same calm wisdom that had initially drawn the agents to the mosque. He always reminded them, "This is not about us. This is about the truth that Allah has given us. We are merely vessels for that truth." 1 year later, the mosque held a celebration to mark the anniversary of the miraculous fire. The agents who had once come to attack the mosque now stood beside the very people they had once considered their enemies. The event was not just about celebrating a survival story, it was about celebrating the unity, the peace, and the spiritual transformation that had occurred in their lives. As Carter looked around the room, he saw faces he had once known only as colleagues, but now they were his brothers and sisters in faith. He had witnessed the power of a single event to change everything, to transform hearts, challenge perceptions, and ultimately bring people together. He realized that the miracle of the fire had not just been about saving a building, it had been about saving the souls of those who had witnessed it. The flame of faith that had ignited that night continued to burn brightly, lighting the way for all who were willing to seek it. In that moment, Carter knew one thing for certain. The journey he had begun that night was only the beginning. The light that had first touched his heart in the mosque would continue to guide him for the rest of his life.